Howdy there, friends. We are back for part 3 of the Opus 17 set review, going to cover light and dark as well as the starter cards. And I've got with me Jared at Eureka Wallace. Jared, how are you, sir?
Good. How about you?
Excellent, excellent. You ready to finish off this set review?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Well, let us start with a little more Brave Exvius crystal support, and that is Engelbert. He is our light card, and when he enters, he gains 2 crystals. He technically has an action ability, too, that you can spend a crystal to reduce damage from abilities to 0, which is pretty nice. I haven't seen anyone use that yet. Mainly people have been using the crystals offensively through Glaciela's abilities, and I've seen this guy a few times. Obviously, he feeds you a bunch of crystals, but I've also seen decks where people just don't really feel like they need them, so they just go ahead and, you know, get crystals in other manners. Yeah. So I don't know if him being a light is worth it. It is interesting to note that it is technically 2 triggers of crystals, so if you're running Sarah Mobius, for example, her ability will trigger 2 times because it sees 2 crystals or whatever. Beyond that, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with this card. I wonder if they don't really even need it because they don't have trouble using crystals. Where do you think Engelbert's going to show up, if at all?
Yeah, I think it's just like a nice generic option for the crystal decks, and I think it would have been like a total shoe-in for the deck if the next card that we're going to talk about, the dark card, wasn't also super, super good for crystals and arguably the better of the 2 cards. Yeah. That being said, there are some decks that can probably play both. I think the biggest one is when you're playing water crystals, you're going to have the Mog 6 in the deck, and with Mog 6 in the deck, it kind of gives you a natural discard outlet for your extra light and dark cards. So you'll probably play the light Engelbert and Venera, the dark card that we're about to see here in a second, in some combination. But Engelbert is definitely the less important of the 2, in my opinion. And in that regard, it's probably going to be like a one-of at best in some decks. Now, in particular, in Mono Earth, there isn't really, like, you've always really wanted to play Robo, but there isn't really a good way to get crystals besides the Geomancer backups. And in that deck in particular, I do think that Engelbert is probably just a lot more useful than Venera. And because of that, I would expect to see Engelbert in a couple of different strategies that are maybe not water decks, and so they have a more difficult time getting access to crystals than water does.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so moving on from our light hero to our light legend, we have Maria. Maria. We just saw a card named Maria. And when I first read this, I thought, well, I don't know, turning backups into forwards. How useful is that? Is that kind of goofy? She is technically a rebel, although if you were doing some rebel package, I feel like you'd go in on the other Maria. That being said, I have at least seen one instance where she could be very potent. My friend was running Samurais, and what he would do is he'd have this big power play. He would just dump his whole hand. Basically, all he has to see is Cyan. He sees Cyan, he searches out Heian, he plays Heian, and then he dumps the last card to play Maria. Maria activates the Samurai backup. That's also a 14 character. So now it's a 10k attacker. It can attack already. It's been on the field for a while. Yeah. It goes in, cleaves, Heian goes in, cleaves, reactivates both of them because they're 14, and he's just like, what do? You just got this massive board. It seems very potent there. Obviously, any 2 cost she activates is automatically going to be a 10k, which is really cool. It, of course, does lose all of its abilities. Outside of that, I don't know. I don't know if there's a whole lot of other builds. Maybe monks as well. Maybe turning a backup monk into a forward monk all of a sudden could be really potent. Maybe the same with dragoons. Of course, it'll obviously compete for if there's a better light or dark card you want to use in any of those decks. But at first I thought it was a little gimmicky, but I will say I was surprised to already see, like, oh, okay, yeah, there's kind of a place for that. What do you think of Maria?
Yeah, I think surprised to see that there is probably a place for it is a good thing. I think having backups become forwards is kind of like calculus that your opponent really isn't expecting in terms of attackers. It's like a pseudo haste. It doesn't really give anything haste, but it creates a new attacker out of nowhere, and that could be potentially useful in some decks. I think this card is severely limited. I think if this card was anything besides light, it would probably see play in a lot of decks. But I think because it's light, it's competing with a whole set of cards that it wouldn't have been otherwise, like Kadaj, like Lightning, like Venera, like Engelbert, like the Emperor. all of which have their potential uses this set. And because of that, I'm not like super hyped about Maria. I was a lot more excited before I saw like how good Venera and Engelbert were.
Yeah.
But afterwards, I still think it's like a good card, and I still expect to see it pop up every now and again. But I would be surprised if this was like one of the more popular lighter dark options that you could choose from at this
Agreed.
point.
Love that artwork. It'll be interesting to see if and what it does. So, moving on to Dark, since there's only 2 of each, of course. Venera Finesse, something like that. Very wicked-looking symbol on her background. I haven't played the game, but so I'm assuming maybe that's something to do with the Assassin's Guild, since she is an assassin. But this card gets reduced by 1 for every crystal you control. Can absolutely become 0, so a Roche with a bigger body and an on-attack trigger. Can't get mad at that. And the on-attack trigger is great, too. Again, you've got all these crystals. You can pay 1 to reduce the entire board opponent controls by 5,000, which basically says you're not going to lose combat. You can swing in anything you want that turn, and surely it's going to be bigger. Just a really strong card. I've already seen its potency, especially good against, I know, like my friend runs a Rydia deck, and he's like, oh, I'm worried that this card comes down, just swings in, and just can kind of like wipe out the entire board. Really strong, like you said. I think you absolutely want to play this over the Engelbert, and even the haste. Like, even if they don't have a board, if they're thinking, oh, they're only going to attack me twice, no big deal. Oh, surprise, here's Venera. She's just good. Everything about her I've seen is worked very well if you're running that crystal package.
Yep, I totally agree. It's just that it looks very, very solid, and I would be surprised if this wasn't, like the Shining, the most seen lighter dark card of the set. I'm not sure, like, exactly how many crystals you need to be playing for this card to be good, but I think the answer is, well, if you have any crystals, then it's probably just a solid choice.
It's not as much of a solid choice, and that is the Emperor, our Dark Legend. I do love this artwork. Very, very attractive features, and I love the facial expression he's making. I'm going to talk about this card in its best light at first, and that's a friend said, if you play like 1 backup, and then turn 2 you play the Emperor, you have this card, you can do the Emperor thing, you draw 2 cards, he now has this protection on him, and he's brave man, so you can just sit there and keep pumping in. The protection is kind of double-sided. It's just anytime he's dealt damage, you remove a counter, which is cool in the sense that it means it protects him in combat. He can block a 9k and not die to it. But it also means they can use any little bit of damage ping, if they've got something that pings for 1,000 or, something minor, that also removes it. So that's like him in his best light. I've mentioned this before. How many Emperors are we going to get that keep trying to do this theme of, you want to play 15 Emperors? You want to play 20? You want your whole deck to be Emperors? In Title, maybe, but if we're not playing Title, like, if we're going to do that, can we get a backup Emperor that says, the Emperor uniquely, you can play all the different versions of the Emperor? Because it doesn't matter how good their effects are if I have to stack my deck full of 20 cards that I can't use, like... Again, all these Emperors are cool concepts, but it's just not gonna work. And I'd love to be proven wrong, but so far I haven't been, because you never see any of these Emperors ever. Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, I kind of see this in a little bit of a different light. I just want to play 3 of this card and then just call it a day, and then not worry about the other Emperors, because if you draw 1 of them, then you just remove the other 2 from your deck, and it's just not a big deal anymore. The obvious big downfall is that sometimes you're going to draw 2 of them, and it's like a total disaster situation, because... if you draw 2 of them before you get the first, or if you draw your second one before you get the first one down, then you're only gonna get 1. Not only do you have 1 of them stuck in your hand, and you only get 1 counter, you're only gonna get 1 draw as well, which is really just like a disaster situation. However, I do think that the merit for playing it is there. I think you don't have to wait a turn. I think you just jam this on turn 1, because it's a 2 CP 9k with protection and brave, and that's just a great stat line. And so I think, like, purely on a numbers perspective, this card is really good. Now the problem is that, like, a lot of the decks in the game are going to want to be playing Venera or Engelbert or Kadaj or Lightning, and because of that, there could be fewer decks that are going to play this Emperor. However, I do think if you're playing an ice deck, there is a very, very strong consideration to play two of these and the other ice 2 CP Legend Emperor, because that one can, get this one, and then you do the Emperor thing, remove the other ones from your deck, and that's just pretty good value there as well. So I think there's some trickery to be had here, but I think even if you just look at this as like a 3 of in whatever random aggro deck that you're playing that you play on turn 1 and you get to punch your opponent a lot of times with the Brave 9K, it's still just good in that regard.
Nice. I hadn't even considered that kind of instant aggro aspect. But yeah, that's a good point, is you really only need to see the one, and then the other two aren't going to be a problem for you. Very good insight. Yeah. Well, that is everything for Opus 17 as far as the base cards. Obviously, we need to move on to the starter cards as well. We'll kind of just talk about these as a whole, and I will definitely need your insight. So these came out the weekend of the Omaha re-raise back in July, which I was physically at, and the starter deck was there at the store. I didn't buy it. I gotta be honest, I didn't really want to buy it. Unlike 10, the 10 starter deck, which 10 was my favorite game, so I kind of was like, all right, I gotta buy this one. But it ended up being really good too. Like, it even surprised me. Wow, all this stuff plays better. Guardians is a heck of a deck. I've watched some of the Japanese streams over there that people are really putting in work with that deck. I see Lostly, Jeff put it in every week on RVA. And it seemed like everyone was underwhelmed by these Opus 4 cards. I haven't playtested them myself, and I haven't seen anyone playtest them. I think I saw one person kind of try them. So maybe this is one we were all right about, that they are just kind of as weak as they seemed on the surface. I'm kind of looking over them right now. Like the Kane, we get 2 Kanes for some reason. Both of them are kind of Zemus is way too expensive and has way too big a cost for his effects. Scarmaglione, they just insist on making these like weird special abilities that are just take so much effort to use. I've heard Baigan, people seem to be very high on him because you can instantly search out Golbez. If you've got the Golbez, use the Baigan to break. You can even do it on the stack of his Golbez's entry effect if he breaks him. Edge seems like a solid enough card, especially like in title, but in ninjas, you really need the other Edge. So even though this one has a special, you're probably not playing it. Other Kane is just whatever. Rydia is very good. I have actually seen some people use Rydia, especially it was really easy to underestimate her power reduction effect, but you could cast a Brynhilde, and now that 7K, not only am I dealing at 5, I'm reducing its power by 2. Now it dies. I get to draw a card. So Rydia was quite good. And like, again, trying to give it the best I can, the Rosa the Cecil, oh, well, technically in combat, you can use the Cecil to dull something, and then Rosa reactivates Cecil for free and then buffs him, and so it's like, oh, these little... But they're just these little combat tricks that require a lot of CP worth of setup. I think the Cecil would probably be great in the 4 title package. Just overall, they've definitely seemed a bit underwhelming. I don't know if you've had any experience with them, if you've gotten to play with them. What can you tell me about this Cecil versus Golbez starter set?
Yeah, so I think you're right that they are definitely underwhelming. For sure. That's a definite. That being said, some of them are really not as bad or as awful as they're made out to be. I think that the Cecil and the Golbez are both very, very niche cards, and because they're light and dark, they're very unlikely to see play, but they're not completely like unplayable. And in that regard, I think that maybe this is a step up from like how good starter decks have been over the past like for few sets, where like Avalanche just was instantly launched into top tier status, and then Guardians has been really, really good as well. It is kind of refreshing to see like a more well-balanced starter set. In terms of the individual cards, Baigon and Rydia probably look like the best cards. However, I'm not really convinced that there's a Golbez worth playing in any deck that Baigon wants to play. The only one that I can even think of is the Sophie Wall deck. With all the 5-drops or more, you play the Lightning Golbez with the Wind Lightning Golbez, and you get the Lightning CP off of Tyro. And so Baigon works as a nice EX burst that searches for Golbez and kind of like can potentially tie together that deck a little bit. Other than that, I don't think it really has a home. I think Rydia would be a really great card, but she has like it's like the worst possible name for a card like that, you know. And because Moshri left the format, there's a lot less value in blowing up or in filling up your own graveyard with summons. So because of that, it just seems a lot more difficult to really justify playing Rydia in anything that you would realistically want to. The best use case at this point is that you can potentially threaten to add Soldier to your hand and dump off-color summons to get Minwu to be cheaper, and Eiko can help out with that as well. But it's still very slow and kind of clunky, and really you're playing it for the bottom auto ability, and it's kind of a build-around card. I'm not really sure if it's gonna end up making any real waves in the end.
That's fair. All right, folks, that is every card we have chat about, and now comes the fun part where I get to pick Jared's brain about Opus 17, and in particular, since we have re-raise events now, and you've kind of guys have always had some continuous competitive play over there in Japan, but we've got it around the world. So first, we'll talk. Well, let's go over Opus 17 really quick, the cards that we all just saw, and I just kind of some overall thoughts from you from cards on the set, in particular cards you're interested in, mechanics. I'll start off too with my personal thoughts. It's kind of a weird set. It definitely doesn't feel as strong as 16 right off the bat, or maybe even 15. And this is the third set we've seen with the crystal mechanic. And man, it's like, so in the first set we got, I think it was 33 cards that had crystals on them in Opus 15. And then in Opus 16 it was 11 cards. And now it's 6. So if you add that up, that's 50. There's only 50 cards. And I can't help but feel disappointed by that, even though, self-admittedly, I'm not even a huge fan of the mechanic, but it just feels so half-baked that they just gave it less and less and less support. And if it worked for Glaciella, I don't know if it would even be interesting this set at all. She's what really even makes it worth using. So really interesting. I would love to hear the design philosophy behind that. Why did they give up on it? Or was that what it always was intended? Did they never mean for it to go beyond that?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer. I'm not really sure that I can. What I will say is that I think when crystals came out and in the set before, something went wrong. In Opus 14, we know this because I don't think that they really intended for Doga and Mashri and Stern to really have quite the impact that they did. I think it was very, very pushed. Yeah. And they did not quite intend for it to be, what it became. And because of that, I think they took some steps to make sure that they didn't do it again at the start of the crystal set, And because of that, it feels just so much weaker than everything that we had before. I'm not really sure if we can continue to evaluate crystals in quite the same way that we did with the mechanics that came before them, just because they were so much stronger and they proved to be problematic, even. That being said, I do think Glaciella does a lot of heavy lifting in kind of saving the mechanic. It adds something unique to crystals that I mean, let me rephrase it. So we've had this trend towards using special abilities without actually discarding the card. Braska does that, Edgar does that. But Glaciella has, Waka does that as well. Glaciella really ties those two mechanics together in a way for a very specific set of cards that makes it strong in the moment, but not necessarily problematic as time goes on,
Yeah, that's fair.
It's not like they could say that Stern can only... imagine if they made Stern, but he had to remove FFBE forwards. It would still be very, very good in, Soiree or whatever, but, It seems very clear that there's a different design philosophy, and the way that they were making cards just before crystals came out and the way that they've made them since crystals came out is a lot more reserved. And I think that's an approach that we should appreciate. And now that Mashri is gone, I think we will see the crystal mechanic working closer to what was intended for the power level of it at the beginning, just because those really, really broken cards are, for the most part, gone.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned power level. I've always said that's kind of one of the downsides of power creep, too, is that even if you release a new card that technically is fine, like that has fine text and everything about it reads just fine. If you're releasing it after something that was boom, so explosive, and so it's just naturally going to seem weaker, even if again it's technically on curve and it does all the things you would want it to do. I think of Al Cid a lot. You know, Al Cid was everything about that card read good. It's good on entry, it gives you continued value, and yet it felt kind of so weak and compared to a lot of that other stuff back in Opus 14. This set's kind of weird for me because I think there's some stuff in it that is really interesting and I really like, but there's some just like bad cards too. There's stuff that I just would never play, and it is disappointing. And maybe this is just sour grapes for me because it happens to be the cards I like. I love 6. I don't necessarily love Type 0 as a game, but I do like the cadets. There's something fun about assembling the cadets and playing that. And Type 0 just gets crapped on set after set after set. So again, maybe someone who doesn't care about that, like I'm sure a War of the Visions fans is like, well, this is great, all these cards and they're all strong and they're clearly pushed. I'm like, oh man, all the cards I like, those suck.
I don't want to be whiny, but there does seem to be some like clear favoritism towards like mobile games, which is very bizarre because like I'm not sure that that's really who's playing the game. But I digress. It's not what I would choose if I was given the option, but it's what we got.
Yeah, I will leave your answer at that diplomatic state that you said it. So let me ask you some meta questions. You've reviewed all these cards. You've gotten to play with a couple. Over here in the States, Soirees are easily one of the dominant decks. We have a Portland re-raise coming up this weekend. We'll see if that Ice Earth list at like Sam Prime came up that kind of beat it up. There was Matiski's Mill list. Avalanche was still kind of around. Sky Pirates were still great, but no one played them. What do you think from the Opus 16 meta is going to stick around, and what do you think is going to fall off? And please tell me if it was like vastly different in Japan. You guys had other decks that I'm not accounting for.
Yeah, I think the big one there is that Ice Earth didn't really make a big splash in Japan. It showed up there for a moment, just as an anti-soiree thing. Arcanist is really solos the deck, and that's not really going to be any different, no matter what region. However, the big one that's missing there is like Ice Wind and Mono Wind were two very, very popular decks, such that there's kind of a trifecta meta. There was Moshri decks while Moshri was illegal, and then there was Soiree decks. There was the decks that beat Soiree decks but kind of lost to the Moshri decks. And those decks that beat Soiree but lost to Moshri were like, Ice Earth is definitely on the lower end of that, but also Mono Wind was really the big one, the Fat Chocobo deck, and it was one that I piloted to great success. I went 5-1 at two events, so it was very, very strong. Some other players were playing Ice Wind to similar effect because it's really mostly the same when you're playing a Bismarck deck that just gets a lot of value. You just don't have to attack Soiree, so if you don't have to attack them, they don't get EX burst, and you can kind of run away with the game in that regard. And the Moshri decks would beat up on the Wind and those decks, and then the Soiree and with the EX count beat up on the Moshri decks, and then it was just this kind of cyclical meta. And with Moshri leaving the picture, it is very, very difficult to tell what is going to change. I'd like to believe that Bismarck decks are still going to be mostly king, because in my opinion they always were, but Samurais look like they're going to prove to be a pretty big challenge. And I think that, with Hien, the way that the damage pressure comes in, decks like Sky Pirates are not likely to stick around. And I'm not even sure if like Windwater FFBE is actually going to take off if they can't beat Hien, because Hien is just such a problematic card for these slower decks that want to play like 3-4 backups and then start to play the cards very, very slowly, like one at a time, and assemble this combo. Conversely, I do think that one of the Wind decks that's going to be very, very popular even after the set drops in with Hien is Mono Wind, the Fat Chocobo version. I think that the Fat Chocobo version is much more well suited to playing against Samurais and playing as everything. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not an easy matchup, and you can easily still lose the game. But the big difference there is that you're playing Fat Chocobo on turn 1, and you start to get your value immediately. And then if you just play Fat Chocobo and it's an edge and they stick, and your opponent just like plays 10s in, you're both adding a card one at a time, and that's a problem. And then that's fine. And then if you play Bismarck, suddenly you're winning the game. And it's really that simple. Whereas with Sky Pirates, you have to play a lot of cards before you get to that situation where, you know, like a storm deck, a cast deck, it takes a really, really long time to get to that similar situation. And Mono Wind just gets there a lot faster. And that makes it good against the other Wind decks, and it also makes it better against decks like Samurais. So I would expect decks like that to be popular. I would expect Monks to make a pretty big comeback. Mashri was problematic for Monks in a lot of ways. Just getting your cards balanced is very, very painful for that deck. Alongside that, you got Shadow Lord, and that is a huge tool for beating up on, you know, these the job decks, and being able to beat up on, like, have a nicer slow deck that can beat up on Avalanche. It can kill like Fat Chocobo and stuff through Cecil, through Edge, which is really important. It beats up on Samurais. It can beat up on the Twins. I think those are all really important. I also expect Rydia and Palamporum, or Rydia Palamporum, all three together, to remain in the meta in some capacity. Losing Mashri is obviously really, really big and really, really painful for those decks, but it does seem like they have enough gas to continue seeing play. In terms of new decks, I would expect like Wind Lightning, and obviously all sorts of crystal decks. I think Mono Water crystals, you know, all those are like wide open. I think that the Water Lightning Leo deck as well, that was kind of popular in Japan for a little bit. That deck has a pretty good shot of contending now that Mashri is gone, because it was kind of one of those decks that struggled against Soiree and that kind of thing, but was good against beating up against Mashri. But only because it had to use so many slots to do so. I think that if you rebuild that deck, you can make it so that it's good against basically any field. And I think in that regard, I would expect to see that deck, especially with the new Alphanod and Alize, with the Y'shtola and Thancred package there, I would expect to see that see play as well.
Very nice. With Soiree, so there's kind of been a trend for the last 5 or 6 opuses where usually the big thing tends to drop off. Sometimes it lingers in the case of like Sophie. Sophie just kind of evolved into the Doga form. Soirees was just such a mainstay over here, and it sounds like it was pretty... Do you see Soiree disappearing following that same trend? Do you think it'll stick around? I mean, is there anything that came out that like specifically hates on it? You could kind of say Shadow Lord, but...
I don't think anything specifically hates on it, but I think it lost a lot of its footing, if that makes sense. It was very, very well grounded as, you know, the EX burst mid-range deck that kind of just gets a very, very slow advantage against Mashri and the mirror match, and kind of struggled at beating the things that punch higher. It's a lot easier to play the decks that punch higher now. And not only that, decks like, you know, Samurais and stuff like that have a lot more gas. The crystal decks that require time to set up are probably going to be able to one card it with Glaciella, frankly. And because of that, I don't expect for Soiree to see nearly as much success as it did last set. That being said, it won't disappear completely, and there will be a Soiree deck that is probably playable. But I don't think it's going to be the powerhouse that it was up until this point.
Yeah, that's fair. I would say they are all technically Brave Exvius cards, but I guess they don't really have any direct synergy there with Glaciella, since none of them have any specials. No, that is a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that up. I've played against your Wind deck, and I've seen you play it against other people too, and there is this feeling of very quick inevitability, especially once Bismarck comes down. So Cecil's down, Edge is down, Sin is down. It's just like, so you can cancel any auto ability. Anything I try to target, Edge redirects, and he doesn't die too. I'm just like, I mean, what do I do? I guess I'll just go jump in a dumpster. Yeah, I just have to quit. Similar with the Rydia lists, and like you said, those are... It's kind of double-sided. Like, it sucks they lost Mashri because they used her so well, but also she was a big enemy of them because bouncing Rydia or the Twins, you know, reset all their counters. And my friend Hoods, who you've played against as well, he'll just... I mean, he did it. You fought the other night. He'll just turn one Rydia into something, has 4 counters, And if he's got Amaterasu in hand, it's like, it doesn't matter what I do, because even if I try to drop Shantoto or whatever, it's like, yep, cancel that. You're way behind. Here's Sophie on turn 2. Okay, you're dead in 3 turns. It's like, huh, yeah, there you go. How about that? So,
yep.
Yeah, it's weird. There are some of these decks that just feel like they give you this just inevitability. It's like, well, there's legit nothing you can do. There is no way you claw your way out of this. I was kind of surprised Icewind didn't show up more over here, because at least in the European re-raises, and I think you mentioned this too, you said Icewind actually beats up on Soirees really well. And is it just through the power of lock? Is it just denying their resources, or?
Yeah, it's all about luck. If you just keep playing lock, they just don't get to play the game. It's just the way it works. So it's something that is not really like a new game plan by any stretch of the imagination, but it's effective for sure.
Absolutely. Guardians. There are times that deck also seems to have that inevitability of, here comes the big play, Waka, Yuna, Orin, da-da-da, Tidus for free, Jekt, bounce him, Tidus for free, get the copy of Jekt. I can literally cancel anything you do. And there are times that deck too, there's nothing I can do. You have a card that cancels anything I do. Do you still feel like that has good potency? Do you feel like it lost any steam? Or?
Yeah, I actually think that deck was very, very good against Foray as well, and that was kind of one that flew under the radar. However, it's... it has some tough matchups, and I'm not sure that Samurais is really a deck that it wants to be fighting against. Or Monks for that matter. And because of that, I still think it's going to be a very strong force in the meta, and I would expect it to actually go up, just because there's going to be fewer EX bursts in general in the meta, and that was a really big problem for the deck. But in terms of like is it going to be a top meta deck or not? That's something that's going to take time. I don't think it really got a buff from any new cards in the set, just from Mashri leaving the meta and the kind of changes that'll affect.
Gotcha. I don't have the images for these cards, but I do want to ask you about the cards we got in the anniversary kit, the new promos, the Squall, the Yuna. Lightning seemed to get the most use. She unequivocally seems like the best card. What is it about Lightning? Do you think she's as good? Do you think any of the others are even worth looking at? Or do you think it's kind of Lightning or bust? Or
so I think that all 3 of the cards are worth looking at, but the other 2 are very, very narrow. So I think Squall is just a very good card for Magisa in particular, and we saw that in Japan a little bit, where people were playing the Mono Fire, Braska, Mashri deck, and Magisa getting out the Squall, he has haste, he lets you pump your guys, and that helps you close the game. Very, very good for that. I think the Squall is just generically a fine card. The problem is just like, it's very narrow. There isn't a whole lot of reason to play it over the other Squall, which is just generally a much better card than it. The only thing about it was that, it comes out of Magisa, and that's a big thing.
Yeah.
Also, it can help you push damage, which is not really a thing that you want to be doing right now, so it's not quite lining up as much. The Yuna is considerably better now that Mashri has left the format. It kind of lets you get some value out of the summons or whatever that's in your break zone that could potentially be getting removed now that you can't feed it to Stern or feed it to Mashri. So in that regard, it is better, and there is some reason that you might consider playing a forward Yuna besides the ones that we have. It is definitely a solid card, but I think a lot of the time it's going to lose out in decks that would consider playing it just by being named Yuna, which is unfortunate. The Light Lightning is definitely the best. I totally agree. It has EX Burst. It's a 4 CP9K, so it's above curve. It's kind of like Kadaj, or Kadaj's biggest rival in the biggest way in the most recent times. And the primary difference is, you want Kadaj when you're pushing damage and you need this kind of like threat that gets around Shantoto and gets around board clear and removal and stuff like that. Whereas Lightning is the defensive option. So Lightning is very, very good at stopping all of the aggro. It blocks all the soirees, it blocks everything, and you can turn a couple of cards in your deck into time, basically. So a lot of people were wondering, how like the Mono Wind deck that won the Sendai Amazing Sen, like how that deck was even playable. And I know Sam Prime mentioned that he saw it on Twitter, and so I assume that's why he put it in the Ice Earth deck. But the primary reason that you would play that is because you're playing a deck that's weak to aggro, and that's why I don't think it really makes a whole lot of sense in the Ice Earth deck. I don't think it's particularly well grounded there. But in decks like Fat Chocobo, in decks like Storm, it makes a lot of sense for them.
Nice. That's awesome. Jared, those are all the questions I could think of off the top of my head. Was there anything else you particularly wanted to bring up or address or tell anyone?
No, I think we did a good job. We covered it all, I think.
Excellent. Well, folks, we'll wrap up here then. I am, of course, Travis. I'm always happy and lucky to be joined by Jared, all the way from Japan. Happy to get his insight on all the cards as well as the set review. Want to give a thank you again to Mysidia Gaming for the thumbnails, Blink and Yosiza from the Discord for helping me get some of the images. Had a really good time. Looking forward to Opus 17. Let me know what cards are you really excited about, or you maybe they didn't live up to your expectations. I always enjoy these early set reviews too, because it's fun to look back at stuff in 2 months like, I was kind of wrong about that one. It's better than I thought, or, oh no, that one was even worse than I thought it was. So, Jared, thank you so much. I appreciate you having you on. You want to give any shout outs or anything before you go?
Oh yeah, thanks to my team TFE. Thanks to everybody who hang out in Discord most days. You all know who you are. And yeah, I write for Crystarium, so you can view any of our articles on f50cgcrystarium.com.
Link will be in the description below. Absolutely. All right, folks, enjoy Opus 17, and until next time, we'll see you later. Take care.